I didn't expect the worst night of my breakup to be the beginning of the best thing that ever happened to me. It started with a knock on my apartment door at almost midnight. Not a polite knock either, more like the kind you make when you don't know whether to leave or stay, when you're already halfway gone but still hoping someone opens up. I was sitting on the floor with my back against the couch, phone face down beside me, replaying the same argument with my ex for the 100th time. When I opened the door and saw Alexander standing there, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how absurdly wrong it felt. Alexander was my ex-girlfriend's best friend, had been for years, the constant in her life. The guy who showed up to birthdays, holidays, random Sunday brunches, the one she trusted with everything. And now he was standing in my doorway, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, eyes tired in that quiet, contained way of his. "Hey, James," he said softly. She told me what happened. Of course she did. I stepped aside without thinking, letting him in. The apartment still smelled like cold coffee and the takeout we'd never finished. Alexander took it in with one glance, her shoes still by the door, the framed photo of us on the bookshelf turned face down. He didn't comment. He never did. That was always his thing. He noticed everything, but only spoke when it mattered. "I didn't know where else to go," he said after a moment. "I figured you probably shouldn't be alone tonight. That should have annoyed me." It didn't. Something about the way he said it, like he wasn't choosing sides, like he wasn't here on her behalf, made my chest loosen just a little. We sat on opposite ends of the couch at first. The TV was on but muted, some late-night show flickering uselessly in the background. I stared at my hands. He stared at the floor. Minutes passed like that, heavy but not uncomfortable. Then, quietly, he said, "You weren't wrong, you know." I looked up. "About what?" "About wanting more than what you were getting." He shrugged, like this was obvious. "You always tried harder than she did. I've seen it for years." That hit harder than the breakup itself. Nobody had ever said that to me. Not her. Not our friends. Definitely not someone from her inner circle. My throat tightened, and I had to look away, suddenly embarrassed by how close I was to crying in front of him. "I'm not here to defend her," Alexander added quickly. "Or attack her. I've watched you bend yourself into shapes that didn't fit, and I hated that." There it was. That strange, steady honesty of his. The thing I'd always noticed, but never paid attention to. He wasn't dramatic. He didn't take up space loudly. He just understood people. Somehow, he always had. I exhaled slowly. I don't even know who I am without her right now. Alexander leaned back, arms crossing loosely. "That's because you never really got to be yourself with her." I turned to him then, really looked at him. The soft stubble along his jaw, the crease between his brows that showed up when he was thinking too hard. He looked nothing like me, taller, broader, calmer, but sitting there, I felt more seen than I had in years. "I don't think I've ever told you this," I said quietly, "but you're the only one who ever asked how I was doing." Like, actually asked. He met my gaze, something unreadable passing through his eyes. That's because I was listening. The room felt different after that. Not charged, not tense, just honest. Like something had shifted, subtle but irreversible. I didn't know then that this was the first crack in everything I thought I knew about myself. I just knew that for the first time since the breakup, I wasn't drowning, and that the person throwing me a lifeline wasn't who I expected at all. Alexander didn't leave that night. Not in the dramatic way. He didn't say, "I'll stay," or ask for permission. He just stayed. At some point, the conversation drifted. The TV got turned off completely, and the silence between us changed shape. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was almost calm. I ended up grabbing 2 beers from the fridge. When I handed one to him, our fingers brushed, and for half a second, I felt something sharp and unexpected run straight up my arm. I told myself it was just nerves, or exhaustion, or the fact that my whole emotional system was fried. So I said, dropping onto the couch again, closer this time without really noticing, "You've officially crossed into enemy territory. She's gonna kill you for this." Alexander smiled faintly. "She'll get over it." "She always does." There was something final in the way he said that. Not bitter, just resolved. We talked for hours, about stupid things at first. Work, random memories, how we'd both secretly hated the same couple we used to hang out with. Then, without either of us steering it there, the conversation turned inward. "She never really listened to you," Alexander said at one point. "Not the way you needed." I laughed softly. "You sound like my therapist." He shook his head. "No, I sound like someone who's been sitting next to you at dinner tables for years, watching you go quiet while she talked over you." That stung. Because it was true, and because he'd noticed. I stared at the wall, jaw tight. "Why didn't you say something?" "I did," he replied. "Just not to you." That made me turn. "What?" "I tried talking to her, more than once." He met my eyes, completely steady. "I told her she took you for granted, that she assumed you'd always adjust." She didn't want to hear it. My chest felt too full, like there wasn't enough room inside me for all of that information. "So you just watched it happen?" "I stayed," he corrected quietly. "Because I didn't want you to feel alone when it fell apart." Something about that cracked me open in a way I wasn't prepared for. I stood abruptly, pacing toward the window, needing space, air, anything. The city lights outside blurred as my eyes burned. I scrubbed a hand over my face, annoyed with myself. "I hate that you know me this well," I muttered. Alexander chuckled once. "Yeah, I was afraid of that." I turned back, confused. "Afraid of what?" "That one day you'd realize it." His voice was calm, but his shoulders were tense now, like he'd just said something he hadn't meant to say out loud. The room went very still. "Realize what?" I asked. He hesitated, just a beat too long. "Then, that you were never invisible. You were just surrounded by people who didn't know how to see you." It was a beautiful deflection. Too beautiful. And we both knew it. I walked back to the couch slowly, sat down. This time there was no space between us. Our knees touched, barely, but neither of us moved away. "Alexander," I said carefully, "there's something you're not saying." His jaw tightened. He stared straight ahead, then finally exhaled. "Yeah, there is." My heart started pounding, loud enough that I was sure he could hear it. "I didn't just stay friends with her because of history," he said, "or loyalty. I stayed because it kept me close to you." I froze. I told myself it was harmless, he continued, voice low, that it didn't mean anything, that I just cared. "But watching you give everything to someone who didn't meet you halfway," he shook his head, "it messed me up more than I expected." I swallowed. "Alexander, are you saying—" "I'm saying," he interrupted gently, finally turning to face me, "that I've understood you for a long time, probably longer than I should have." We were so close now that I could see the slight tremor in his hands. This wasn't rehearsed. This wasn't some bold confession. This was someone stepping off a ledge without knowing what was below. I should have pulled back. I should have said this was too much, too soon, too complicated. Instead, I whispered, "You're the only one who's ever made me feel like I wasn't asking for too much." Something shifted in his expression then. Relief, fear, want, all tangled together. He didn't kiss me. Not yet. He just rested his forehead against mine, careful, like he was giving me time to stop him. I didn't. We stayed like that for a long time. Forehead to forehead, breathing the same air. It wasn't rushed or heated or reckless. It felt careful. Like both of us understood how fragile this moment was, how easily it could shatter if either of us moved the wrong way. "I don't want to be a rebound," Alexander said quietly. That surprised me. I pulled back just enough to look at him. "You think that's what this is?" "I think," he replied slowly, choosing every word, "that you're hurting. And I don't ever want to be someone who takes advantage of that." Something in my chest softened painfully. "That's the thing," I said. "You're not taking anything. You're the only person tonight who hasn't asked me to be okay." He studied my face like he was memorizing it. "I just don't want to confuse comfort with something deeper." I laughed under my breath. "Then we're already screwed." He smiled at that, but there was still caution in his eyes. Why? Because I've been comfortable with you for years, and I've been lonely with her. That landed. Hard. Alexander leaned back slightly, rubbing his hands together like he was grounding himself. Do you remember the night she forgot your birthday? I blinked. Yeah. You laughed it off, made a joke about it, but you went outside and stood on the balcony alone for almost an hour. He shook his head. I followed you. You didn't even notice. I stared at him. You were there. I asked you if you were okay. You said you were just tired. His voice tightened. That was the night I realized I was in trouble. My heart thudded. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because you loved her, he said simply. And because I didn't want to be the guy who complicated your life. The irony of that almost made me laugh again. I stood up, restless, walking to the kitchen. My apartment felt smaller now, like the walls had leaned in to listen. Alexander watched me carefully, like he wasn't sure if I was pulling away or just thinking. I don't know what I'm doing, I admitted. Everything feels exposed. He nodded. Same. I turned to face him. But I know one thing. What's that? I don't feel confused about you. That did it. He stood, slow and deliberate, giving me every chance to back out. James, if we do this, it can't be about filling space she left behind. I know, I said. It's about noticing the space that was always empty. We were standing close again, not touching yet. The tension wasn't physical. It was emotional, thick and unsettling and honest. Can I do something? He asked. I swallowed. Yeah. He reached up, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then cupped my jaw gently, thumb resting near my cheekbone. The touch was grounding, warm, real, nothing rushed, nothing claimed. He kissed me, like someone who had waited too long to be sure. It wasn't messy or desperate. It was slow, tentative at first, like we were both learning a new language we'd somehow already been fluent in. When I kissed him back, really kissed him, I felt something click into place inside me, something quiet and steady and undeniable. When we finally pulled apart, our foreheads touched again, both of us breathing a little heavier now. Well, I murmured, that answers a few questions. Alexander let out a soft laugh. Yeah. Unfortunately, it raises about 100 more. I smiled despite everything. For the first time in a long time, I don't mind that. He stayed the night, but we didn't go any further. We slept on opposite sides of the bed, hands brushing in the dark, like a promise neither of us was ready to rush. And as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, one thought kept repeating in my mind. Somehow, the person who understood me best had been right there all along. Morning came quietly. No dramatic wake-up. No panic. Just soft gray light slipping through the blinds and the sound of Alexander breathing beside me. I didn't move at first. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, letting the reality settle in. This wasn't a dream. And it wasn't a mistake. I turned my head slowly. Alexander was on his side, facing me, eyes closed. Hair slightly messed up in a way that made my chest ache. One arm was stretched out between us, his hand resting open on the sheet, like even in sleep he was leaving space for me to choose. That felt very him. I reached out before I could overthink it, letting my fingers slide into his palm. His grip tightened instantly. Reflexive, grounding. His eyes opened a second later. Hey, he murmured, voice low and rough with sleep. Hey! We smiled at each other like idiots. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Alexander exhaled slowly. Still real? Unfortunately, I said. You're still here. Good, he replied. I was worried that part might disappear. I sat up, dragging a hand through my hair. So, what happens now? He pushed himself up too, leaning back against the headboard. I think we take it slow. Annoyingly slow. I laughed. You're the most frustratingly responsible person I know. That's why you like me. I paused. Yeah, I think it is. We ended up in the kitchen, barefoot, making terrible coffee, and standing way too close for two people who were supposedly taking it slow. But nothing felt forced. No awkwardness. Just a new awareness humming under everything. Then his phone buzzed on the counter. We both looked at it. Her name lit up the screen. Alexander didn't reach for it immediately. He just stared at it, jaw tightening slightly. She's going to find out. I know, I said quietly. I don't want this to hurt you, he said. Not because of her. I met his eyes. I'm done letting my life be organized around her reactions. That seemed to settle something in him. He picked up the phone, read the message, then set it face down again. What did she say? I asked. He shrugged. She wants to talk. Says she feels like she lost two people at once. I swallowed. Do you feel like that? No, he said without hesitation. I feel like I finally stopped pretending. That hit me harder than I expected. Later that day, after he left, I sat alone on the couch, replaying everything. The breakup, the confession, the kiss. The way Alexander looked at me like I was something precious, not something to manage or compromise. I realized something uncomfortable but freeing. My ex had loved the version of me that bent easily. Alexander loved the version of me that spoke. That evening, Alexander texted me. I'm proud of you, by the way. For what? I replied, for choosing yourself, even when it's messy. I stared at my phone for a long time before answering. I didn't know I was allowed to. A second later, you always were. You just needed someone who wouldn't punish you for it. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Not because everything was figured out, but because, for once, I wasn't walking toward someone who needed me smaller. I was walking toward someone who already knew me. The first time we went out together, it wasn't a date. At least, that's what we told ourselves. Alexander suggested coffee like it was the most neutral thing in the world. No expectations, no implications. Just two people who already knew each other too well, sitting across from each other in public daylight, seeing what that felt like. It felt terrifying. I got there early, nerves buzzing under my skin, and chose a table near the window. When Alexander walked in a few minutes later, scanning the room until his eyes landed on me, something warm and steady spread through my chest. He smiled, soft, unguarded, and for a second I forgot how to breathe. Hey, he said, sliding into the chair across from me. Hey, I replied, way too aware of how close his knee was to mine. We ordered, made small talk, laughed a little too easily. It all felt natural until it didn't. Until the weight of us settled between the sips of coffee and half-finished sentences. So I said finally, we're really doing this, huh? He tilted his head. Doing what? Us, I clarified. Whatever this is. Alexander leaned back slightly, studying me. Does it scare you? Yes, I said immediately. Then added, quieter. But not in the bad way. That made him smile. Good. Because I don't want to be careful in a way that means hiding. That was the first moment I realized how different this was going to be. A week later, she called me. I didn't answer at first. Let it ring until the buzzing in my pocket stopped. But the guilt, old familiar, crept in, the kind I used to respond to without thinking. So I called her back. James, she said immediately, voice tight. You and Alexander. Yes, I interrupted. My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed steady. We're seeing each other. There was a long silence. Then, sharp and wounded. How long? I thought about it. About the years of unspoken understanding. About the night everything finally broke open. Longer than you think, I said honestly. But we didn't cross any lines while we were together. That's not the point, she snapped. You don't do this. You don't move on like this. I almost laughed. I do now, I said. I spent a long time being who you needed me to be. I'm done with that, she accused. She cried. She told me I was betraying her, embarrassing her, ruining everything. And for the first time, I didn't shrink. I loved you, I said quietly. But you didn't love me the way I needed. And Alexander sees me. That's not something I'm willing to apologize for. When the call ended, my hands were shaking, but I felt lighter than I ever had. That night, I told Alexander everything. He listened without interrupting, without trying to fix it. When I finished, he just pulled me into a hug, firm and grounding, like he was anchoring me to the present. I'm proud of you, he murmured into my hair. For what? I asked. For not disappearing. That was the moment I realized something huge. I hadn't fallen for Alexander because he was safe. I'd fallen for him because he made me brave. The first time Alexander held my hand in public, it wasn't planned. We were walking through a small street market on a Saturday afternoon, the kind with mismatched stalls and overpriced pastries. It was crowded enough that people kept brushing past us, close enough that we had to lean in to hear each other speak. At some point, without looking, Alexander reached for me. Not dramatic, not cautious either, just natural. His fingers slid into mine like they'd always belonged there. My stomach flipped. I tensed for half a second, instinct kicking in. What if someone sees? What if this makes things complicated? And then I realized something strange. I didn't care. Alexander noticed the hesitation anyway. He always noticed. He slowed his pace, thumb brushing against my knuckles. You okay? I nodded. Yeah, just getting used to not hiding. He smiled at that. You're doing great. Those 3 words stayed with me longer than they should have. Not everything was easy after that. Some days were awkward. Some conversations were heavy. Mutual friends were confused. A few were quietly supportive. A few clearly took sides. Alexander never pushed me to explain myself to anyone. You don't owe people access to your growth. He told me once, as we lay on my couch, legs tangled, ceiling fan humming above us. With him, things unfolded slowly but deeply. Late-night talks, shared silences, the kind of intimacy that came from being known, not just wanted. When we finally crossed the line physically, it didn't feel like a leap. It felt like a continuation, like we'd already done the hard part. One night, weeks later, Alexander admitted something that stopped me cold. I almost walked away, he said quietly, tracing patterns on my arm. When? Right after you and her broke up. I thought if I stayed close, I'd be taking advantage of your pain. I turned toward him. Why didn't you? Because you looked at me and said you felt seen, he replied. And I realized I wasn't creating something new. I was just finally letting myself be honest about what was already there. I rested my forehead against his shoulder, emotion tightening my throat. You know what scares me the most? He hummed. Tell me that this feels right in a way I don't know how to protect. Alexander's arm tightened around me. Then don't protect it by shrinking. Protect it by being real, even when it's messy. That was the night I understood the difference between love that demands compromise and love that invites truth. Months later, I ran into my ex unexpectedly at a mutual friends gathering. She looked surprised to see me relaxed, laughing, standing beside Alexander without flinching. She pulled me aside near the end. You seem different, I smiled, genuinely. I am. She studied me for a moment, then sighed. He always understood you better than I did. I didn't argue, because for the first time, I wasn't trying to be understood by someone who couldn't meet me where I stood. As Alexander and I walked home that night, fingers intertwined, I realized something that still makes me smile. The best love of my life didn't arrive loudly. It was patient, observant, honest. It was the person who had been listening long before I learned how to speak. There wasn't some big cinematic moment where everything locked into place. No dramatic declarations. No sweeping gestures. It happened on a Tuesday night. Alexander was in my kitchen, barefoot, wearing one of my old t-shirts, chopping vegetables way too seriously for someone making pasta. I was leaning against the counter, watching him without pretending I wasn't. The apartment felt lived in a way it never had before, like it finally belonged to someone who wasn't waiting to leave. What? He asked, glancing over his shoulder. Nothing, I said. Then, honest, because I didn't know how to be anything else with him anymore, I was just thinking how weird it is that this feels like home. He stopped cutting, turned fully toward me. Weird good or weird scary? Weird true. That made him smile. The real one. The one that always undid me. Later, after dinner, we ended up on the couch, legs tangled, some show playing that neither of us was actually watching. At one point, he rested his head on my shoulder, absent-mindedly tracing slow circles on my chest. You know, he said quietly, I spent years convincing myself I was just protective of you. that I just cared because you were important. And now? I asked. And now I know I loved you long before I let myself want you. That should have overwhelmed me. Instead, it settled. I think, I said slowly, I loved you back. I just didn't know what it was allowed to look like. He shifted, lifting his head to look at me. Do you regret any of it? I thought about the relationship that drained me. The nights I felt unseen, the way I used to edit myself to keep the peace. Then I thought about Alexander, about being chosen without being reshaped. No, I said, because if I hadn't been lost, I wouldn't have recognized you. Months later, someone asked me if it bothered me that my happiest relationship came from such a complicated place. From my ex's best friend. From something that, on paper, looked messy. I told them the truth. Love doesn't always arrive the right way. Sometimes it arrives patiently, quietly, watching you from the edges until you're ready to be honest. With yourself most of all. Alexander didn't save me. He didn't fix me. He just understood me. And that changed everything.